The most popular barbecue sauce in America may also be one of the worst sauces you can put on your grill. It contains 5 different sources of sweetness. A realistic portion can deliver almost an entire daily limit of added sugar for many women. And when that sauce meets a hot grill, the sugary coating can begin burning long before the meat underneath is ready to eat. But that is only the beginning. One familiar barbecue sauce spent approximately 30 years under the ownership of a company best known for making bleach. Another bottle uses the reputation of a legendary Tennessee whiskey, even though the sauce has never been produced anywhere near Tennessee. And one major brand publicly promised to remove high fructose corn syrup, quietly brought it back, and left the evidence of both decisions available online. These are not rare products hidden in specialty stores. They are some of the most recognizable barbecue sauces in the United States. Millions of families purchase them every year without ever turning the bottles around to examine what is actually inside. Welcome back to Golden Menu, the channel where we investigate the stories behind familiar food labels and help you make more informed choices at the grocery store. Today we are examining 7 popular barbecue sauces, beginning with the least concerning and moving toward the worst bottle in the investigation. After that, we will reveal 5 better alternatives that genuinely deserve a place beside your grill. Make sure you stay until the final choice, because the worst sauce on this list is also the #1 selling barbecue sauce in America. Its popularity was built on an authentic family story and a recipe that once earned real recognition. But the product sold today is controlled by a completely different company, while the familiar logo continues carrying the memory of what the brand used to be. Once you understand what happened behind that label, you may never look at the bottle the same way again. Let us begin with number 7, KC Masterpiece Original Barbecue Sauce. The moment you open this bottle, everything seems familiar. The sauce is dark and thick. It carries the sweet, smoky aroma many people associate with a traditional Kansas City cookout. For decades, millions of American shoppers have trusted it without feeling any reason to investigate further. But the history behind KC Masterpiece is very different from the story suggested by its packaging. The sauce was created by Richard Davis, a child psychiatrist who also had a serious passion for barbecue. In 1977, his recipe gained recognition through barbecue competitions and helped establish the credibility that would eventually turn KC Masterpiece into a national brand. That origin was authentic. Richard Davis was a real person. The competition history was real. And the original sauce earned its reputation through cooking rather than corporate advertising. But the product did not remain under the control of its creator. For approximately 30 years, KC Masterpiece belonged to Clorox, the same corporation associated with Clorox bleach, Pine Sol cleaning products, and Glad trash bags. This was not a brief marketing partnership. The barbecue sauce existed as a product line inside the corporate portfolio of a household cleaning company for 3 decades. In 2017, Clorox sold the brand to Kraft Heinz. Remember the name Kraft Heinz, because it will return several times during this investigation. Richard Davis has not controlled the commercial product for many years. The brand continued benefiting from the history he created, but the recipe and the business decisions surrounding it moved far beyond his influence. His story remained useful to the identity of the sauce, even after the product itself entered an entirely onto a piece of meat, and the first impression can still be convincing. The aroma is rich, sweet, and smoky. For a moment, it smells like the beginning of a real cookout. The problem appears after several minutes over high heat. The acidity begins to disappear. The spices lose their presence. The sweetness becomes increasingly dominant until it covers almost every other flavor on the meat. What remains is a heavy, sugary glaze that can blacken before the food underneath has enough time to cook properly. This is not simply a matter of personal taste. It is the predictable behavior of a sauce built around corn-based sweeteners. When concentrated sugar is exposed to the intense heat of a grill, it caramelizes quickly. Continue heating it, and that caramelized layer begins to burn. The exterior may look dark and developed, while the meat beneath it is still undercooked. The ingredient panel reveals another detail that many shoppers overlook. Corn-based sweetener appears more than once. Food manufacturers can list different forms of a similar sweetener as separate ingredients. Instead of presenting one visibly dominant amount of sugar, the total sweetness can be divided into several smaller entries. Each name may appear less important on its own, but when those ingredients are considered together, they reveal how much of the formula depends on sweetness. KC Masterpiece uses this approach by listing corn-based sweetener in separate forms. Caramel coloring is also added to create the deep brown appearance consumers expect from barbecue sauce. That color may suggest slow cooking, smoke, and hours beside a barbecue pit. In reality, part of the appearance comes directly from an added coloring ingredient. Longtime customers have found ways to make the sauce more balanced, but their solutions reveal another weakness in the original bottle. Many people add apple cider vinegar to reduce the sweetness. Some mix in cayenne pepper or smoked paprika to restore the heat and smokiness. Others add mustard to give the sauce more acidity and structure. When loyal customers regularly need to repair a product in their own kitchens, that is no longer a minor suggestion. It is evidence that the finished recipe is not delivering the balance they expected. If KC Masterpiece is already in your refrigerator, you do not necessarily need to waste it. Add a small splash of apple cider vinegar. Mix in a pinch of cayenne pepper or smoked paprika. A little mustard can also help bring back the acidity that disappears beneath the sweetness. Avoid adding more salt. Extra salt will not solve the central problem and may cause the sugary flavor to feel even stronger. The name on the front recalls the work of Richard Davis. The ownership behind the bottle now leads to Kraft Heinz. And the ingredient panel divides corn-based sweetness into separate entries. But the next sauce raises an even more uncomfortable question. How can two shoppers buy what appears to be the same product from the same brand, yet receive different formulas simply because one lives in the United States and the other lives in Canada? The answer brings us to number 6. Bull SI Original Barbecue Sauce. This is the bottle many American families pick up at warehouse stores and major supermarket chains without giving it a second thought. Even the name Bull SI suggests precision, confidence, and a recipe that has been carefully perfected. But take that same brand across the border into Canada, and the formula suddenly changes. The Canadian version is made with real sugar. The version sold in the United States uses high fructose corn syrup instead. The logo is the same, the bottle looks nearly identical, and the product occupies the same position on the shelf. Yet, American and Canadian customers are not receiving the same sauce. Canadian consumers demanded a completely different flavor. It was a financial decision. High fructose corn syrup has historically been less expensive for manufacturers in the United States, partly because federal corn subsidies make it more economical in the American market. Those agricultural policies do not operate in exactly the same way in Canada, so American shoppers received the cheaper sweetener while the familiar packaging remained virtually unchanged. There was no major announcement explaining the difference. Unless someone compared both ingredient panels, that customer would probably never know two formulas existed. Now turn over an American bottle of Bull SI and look at the first ingredient. It is not tomato. It is not vinegar. It is not smoke or molasses. The first ingredient is high fructose corn syrup. Brown sugar appears soon after it, meaning the formula introduces two powerful sources of sweetness before establishing much of the flavor people normally associate with barbecue. A stated serving of 2 tablespoons provides approximately 3 teaspoons of added sugar. According to guidance from the American Heart Association, most women should limit added sugar to approximately 6 teaspoons during an entire day. One measured serving of Bull SI can therefore consume roughly half of that daily amount before the meat, side dishes, drinks, and dessert are counted. The printed serving also creates a misleading picture of how people actually use barbecue sauce. Most home cooks do not measure exactly 2 tablespoons before brushing a rack of ribs or coating several pieces of chicken. They pour directly from the bottle, add multiple layers during cooking, and often place more sauce on the table. A realistic portion can contain considerably more sugar than the label makes immediately obvious. The problems continue when Bull Si reaches the grill. Its relatively thin consistency makes it difficult to build a substantial layer of bark. Part of the sauce slides from the meat and falls into the flames. What remains on the surface begins drying into a brittle film before the protein underneath has finished cooking. The dark exterior may look promising from a distance, but it is largely a hardened sugar coating rather than the result of smoke, seasoning, and controlled heat working together. Bull Si is another Kraft Heinz product. That connection matters because Kraft Heinz later submitted formal documents to the federal government, acknowledging that decisions made across the company had destroyed billions of dollars in brand value. The company itself eventually had to put a number on the damage, and that number leads directly to the next bottle. Number 5. Heinz Original Barbecue Sauce. This is the only product in this investigation whose parent company filed official paperwork, confirming that some of its best-known brands had lost billions of dollars in value. That statement did not come from a food reviewer or a frustrated former employee. It appeared in a filing submitted to the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. Open a bottle of Heinz Original Barbecue Sauce, and the corporate priorities behind it become easier to taste. Sweetness arrives first, liquid smoke follows. Beneath those dominant flavors is a familiar ketchup-style base wearing the costume of barbecue sauce. When critics compared products across the Kraft Heinz barbecue range, many reached a similar conclusion. The sauces were too sweet, lacked sufficient acidity, and Heinz Original begins setting quickly. The sugar forms a hard outer layer, while the interior of the meat still requires more cooking time. From across the yard, the dark coating may resemble authentic barbecue bark. Bite into it, however, and the surface cracks more like candy. Underneath that shell is wet sweetness without enough spice, smoke, or acidity to create a balanced flavor. To understand why the product developed this way, we need to return to 2015. That was the year Kraft and Heinz merged under a business strategy heavily influenced by 3G Capital. The objective was direct and aggressive: reduce costs, improve margins, and produce fast financial results. Inside a large food company, cost reduction does not always stop with office expenses or administrative departments. Eventually, it can reach ingredient sourcing, staffing, recipe development, quality control, and the complexity of the products themselves. More expensive ingredients can be replaced with cheaper substitutes. Recipes can be simplified. Product development can slow down. The label, however, remains familiar, allowing customers to assume that the food inside has not meaningfully changed. For several years, that strategy created the appearance of financial efficiency. Then the real cost became impossible to ignore. In February of 2019, Kraft Heinz announced an impairment charge of approximately $15.4 billion. In simple terms, the company formally admitted that some of its most important brands were worth far less than previously believed. The loss was greater than the amount the company had hoped to protect through years of aggressive cost-cutting. Warren Buffett, whose investment suffered losses of approximately $3 billion, later admitted publicly that Berkshire Hathaway had paid too much for Kraft. By the middle of 2025, the share price had fallen to approximately half of its previous value. Kraft Heinz eventually announced plans to divide major parts of the company into two separate businesses. Heinz Original Barbecue Sauce is not on this list because eating one serving will immediately harm you. It is here because the bottle represents what happens when a food company begins treating consumer trust as another expense that can be reduced. The logo continues carrying decades of familiarity, while the recipe reflects a system designed to protect margins. If you have noticed that a familiar food brand no longer tastes the way you remember, tell us about it in the comments. Your experience may help another Golden Menu viewer recognize a change that the packaging never explained. The next company went even further. It publicly announced that it would improve its barbecue sauce by removing high fructose corn syrup. That promise earned positive attention. Then the company quietly reversed the decision without giving customers an equally visible explanation. The original promise is still available online. The current ingredient list contradicts it. That brings us to number 4. Kraft Original Slow Simmered Barbecue Sauce. Kraft has occupied American kitchens for so long that reaching for one of its bottles can feel almost automatic. Many shoppers recognize the logo before they even consider the product. That familiarity is exactly why the history of this sauce deserves closer attention. In 2015, Kraft made a public commitment to remove high fructose corn syrup from its barbecue sauce. The announcement received media coverage and allowed the company to present the reformulation as a meaningful improvement. Customers were given the impression that Kraft had listened to concerns and decided to produce a better sauce. But at some point after that announcement, the old campaign explaining the reversal. Most customers never received a clear warning that the formula had changed again. The familiar packaging remained on store shelves, while high fructose corn syrup quietly returned to the bottle. Open a current product listing from a major American retailer and read the ingredient panel. High fructose corn syrup is not hidden near the bottom. It appears as the first ingredient. The original Kraft announcement about removing it can still be found online. The current retail listing showing its return is also publicly available. Anyone willing to search carefully can place the promise and the present formula beside each other and see the contradiction. Kraft appears to have calculated that very few customers would ever look far enough to find both documents. The sauce itself reflects the same priorities. Sweetness dominates from the first taste. Tomato and molasses attempt to provide structure underneath it, but they never fully overcome the sugary foundation. Some reviewers have described the product as a more sophisticated form of ketchup. That description may sound harmless, but it is not a compliment for something marketed as slow-simmered barbecue sauce. On the grill, the formula begins crystallizing quickly. The edges darken and scorch while the meat continues cooking. Instead of developing layers of tomato, vinegar, smoke, and spice, the sauce leaves behind an intensely sweet coating with a processed sharpness that artificial hickory flavoring cannot disguise. One reviewer described it as barbecue sauce performing an imitation of itself. That may be the most accurate summary of the bottle. It carries the expected color, aroma, and familiar branding, but the experience underneath feels increasingly disconnected from what the label promises. The timeline is difficult to ignore. In 2015, Kraft publicly committed to removing high fructose corn syrup. In 2019, Kraft Heinz recorded an impairment charge of approximately $15.4 billion. Today, high fructose corn syrup is once again the first ingredient in this sauce. The front of the bottle presents comfort, tradition, and slow-simmered flavor. The ingredient panel describes a product built around an inexpensive industrial sweetener. Those two sides of the package are telling very different stories. If this investigation is helping you look at familiar products differently, take 1 second to press the like button. That small action helps Golden Menu reach more people who may still be purchasing these sauces entirely out of habit. The next bottle charges customers more by selling an image of Tennessee heritage. But the sauce is not produced in Tennessee, the implied barbecue expert does not exist, and the whiskey that justifies the premium price appears close to the bottom of the ingredient list. Number 3. Jack Daniel's Original No. 7 Barbecue Sauce. This is often positioned as the premium choice. It commonly costs $1 or $2 more than the ordinary bottles beside it. Customers accept that higher price because the packaging creates a powerful impression before the cap is ever opened. The dark label evokes Tennessee history. The famous whiskey name suggests an authentic connection to a real distillery. The presentation creates an image of smoke, oak barrels, southern cooking, and an experienced barbecue master carefully building a sauce around one of the most recognizable whiskeys in America. The first question is obvious. Does the sauce actually contain Jack Daniel's Tennessee whiskey? Technically, the answer is yes. The whiskey appears on the ingredient panel. But its position on that panel you pass cane sugar, water, apple cider vinegar, tomato paste, molasses, and several other ingredients. Jack Daniel's Tennessee whiskey appears close to the bottom of the list, which indicates that it represents only a small part of the total formula. Any alcohol remaining after standard commercial food processing would be negligible. The customer is not receiving a strong whiskey-based sauce. What the customer mainly tastes is the idea of Tennessee whiskey, communicated through the famous name, the dark color, and the design of the label. The detail missing from the packaging is even more revealing. This sauce is not made in Lynchburg, Tennessee. It is not produced beside the Jack Daniel's distillery, and it has never been manufactured in a traditional Tennessee smokehouse. Brown-Forman Corporation, the Louisville-based spirits company connected to the Jack Daniel's brand, licenses the famous name to an outside food manufacturer. The barbecue sauce is produced at a facility in Ohio. In other words, a stainless steel production tank in Ohio is being presented through packaging that encourages customers to imagine a Tennessee barbecue pit. The experienced pit master suggested by the label does not exist. That character is part of the visual identity created to sell the product. He is not standing beside a smoker in Lynchburg carefully adjusting the recipe. He is a marketing element, and has always been a marketing element. Once the sauce reaches the grill, its performance follows the ingredient list rather than the story on the bottle. The sugary edges begin charring before the center of the meat has finished cooking. A candy-like coating forms across the surface, producing an exciting first bite that soon becomes overwhelmingly sweet. The smokiness suggested by the packaging fades before the meal is complete. The whiskey character is so faint that many people would struggle to identify it without seeing the label first. You may pay $5 for this bottle, instead of $3 for a comparable generic sauce. But the higher price does not necessarily buy more authentic smoke, better grilling performance, or a meaningful amount of Tennessee whiskey. It mainly buys access to a famous name, and the history that name encourages you to imagine. The result is the same rapid charring, the same heavy sweetness, and a whiskey note so subtle that it may exist more clearly in the printed label than in the food itself. The next sauce does not sell Tennessee prestige. Its attraction is exactly the opposite. It has spent more than 80 years promising American families that an inexpensive bottle can still deliver honest barbecue flavor. But once you examine what gives the sauce its color, thickness, and smoke, that promise begins to collapse. That brings us to number 2. Open Pit Original Barbecue Sauce. For more than 80 years, Open Pit has remained one of the most affordable barbecue sauces on American grocery shelves. Its appeal has always rested on a simple promise. A low price should not automatically mean that the customer has accepted a bad product. But this is where that promise begins to fall apart. Caramel coloring is added to Open Pit because the sauce would not otherwise look the way consumers expect barbecue sauce to look. Without that cosmetic assistance, the natural appearance of the formula would fail to communicate the dark, slow-cooked richness suggested by the bottle. That detail tells almost the entire story. The product requires added coloring just to visually resemble the category in which it is sold. Pour Open Pit onto a plate, and the thin consistency becomes immediately obvious. Rather than clinging to the meat, it spreads quickly like darkened water. Place it over a hot grill, and much of the sauce runs from the surface and falls directly into the flames. The result is dries into a thin, sweet film. It does not build the substantial crust people expect from properly prepared barbecue. The coating can harden before the chicken, pork, or beef underneath has finished cooking. Saving a few dollars on the bottle becomes far less meaningful if the sauce makes an expensive piece of meat more difficult to cook properly. The ingredient panel explains why Open Pit behaves this way. The first ingredient is high fructose corn syrup. It appears before tomato puree, vinegar, and water. The formula establishes sweetness before it establishes tomato flavor, acidity, or anything connected to traditional barbecue cooking. The smokiness comes from added hickory flavoring. The dark color comes partly from caramel coloring. The thickness depends on modified food starch. Each additive is performing a job that the basic recipe does not accomplish on its own. The flavoring attempts to create smoke without an actual smoking process. The coloring creates the appearance of slow cooking. The modified starch builds an artificial body that the tomatoes and other ingredients cannot provide. Taken together, the formula begins to look less like a completed barbecue recipe and more like a list of corrections. One ingredient supplies the missing appearance. Another supplies the missing texture. A third supplies the missing smoke. Nothing about that structure suggests a sauce built slowly from ingredients chosen for their natural ability to work together. Some longtime customers defend Open Pit by calling it a useful base. They suggest adding vinegar, mustard, spices, pepper, or other sauces at home. But that defense creates another uncomfortable question. If the customer must add the acidity, heat, body, and complexity, what exactly did the manufacturer finish? People are not describing a complete product. They are defending the raw material from which they can make a better one themselves. Open Pit is currently part of Conagra Brands, another enormous food conglomerate managing a wide portfolio of familiar supermarket products. From a corporate perspective, there may be little incentive to meaningfully improve a sauce that continues selling, because generations of shoppers already recognize the name. The habit was created decades ago. The bottle does not need to become exceptional if familiarity continues placing it in shopping carts. That is why the next entry is so disappointing. Every sauce we have examined so far contains ingredients or corporate decisions that weaken the story presented on the label. But the number one bottle is different, because it once genuinely earned its reputation. The founders built it themselves. They entered a major barbecue competition against hundreds of rivals and nearly won. The original sauce was real, the family story was real, and the public affection surrounding the brand was deserved. Then, the company was sold. Today, the founder whose nickname created the brand has no connection to the bottle that dominates American grocery stores. The recipe contains 5 separate sources of sweetness, and high fructose corn syrup appears first. Yet it controls more than 40% of the American barbecue sauce market and outsells its 7 closest competitors combined. The most popular bottle in the country is also the worst sauce in this golden menu investigation. Number 1. Sweet Baby Ray's Original Barbecue Sauce. The story of Sweet Baby Ray's began in 1985, inside a basement in Chicago. Brothers Dave and Larry Raymond developed their own barbecue sauce and entered it into the Mike Royko Rib Fest, where they competed against approximately 700 other participants. It was not created by an advertising agency. The brothers did not purchase a fictional history or attach their name to an existing factory product. They developed a real sauce, entered a real competition, and proved that their recipe could compete against hundreds of rivals. The credibility was authentic. The family origin was authentic. At that time, Sweet Baby Ray's genuinely deserved the reputation it was beginning to build. But that version of the story did not last forever. In 2005, Dave and Larry Raymond sold the brand to Ken's Foods, a Massachusetts company best known for producing salad dressings. The reported sale price was approximately $30 million. That is the moment when the original founding story and the modern grocery store product began moving in different directions. The most revealing detail is what Dave Raymond kept after the sale. He retained the rights to his own nickname, Sweet Baby Ray, and walked away from the bottled sauce business. The real Sweet Baby Ray now operates a barbecue restaurant outside Chicago. He has no connection to the Sweet Baby Ray's bottles currently sold in supermarkets across the United States. He kept his identity. The salad dressing company received the National Sauce brand. The label still benefits from the Raymond family history, but that story belongs to an earlier version of the product. The man whose nickname built the brand no longer controls the sauce, the recipe, or the business decisions behind the familiar bottle. Now turn the bottle around and examine the current ingredient panel. The first ingredient is high fructose corn syrup. Continue reading, and corn syrup appears again as a separate ingredient. 2 forms of corn-based sweetener are listed independently, making the total sugar load appear more divided than it really is. Then comes pineapple juice concentrate. After that, molasses. Sugar also appears separately. Altogether, The bottle contains 5 distinct sources of sweetness. 5 different ways of placing sugar into a single barbecue sauce. Smoke flavor, one of the characteristics customers should reasonably expect to define a barbecue sauce, does not appear until much later on the label. The balance is therefore established before the bottle is ever opened. Sweetness controls the formula. Smoke, spice, vinegar, and tomato are left trying to compete underneath it. The serving size printed on the nutrition panel can also create a false sense of moderation. The bottle presents a very small portion as one serving, but most people do not apply barbecue sauce that carefully. Consider a realistic amount for a rack of ribs. 4 tablespoons would not be unusual after brushing the meat several times and adding extra sauce before serving. That amount can contain approximately 32 grams of added sugar. For many women, that is close to the entire daily limit, recommended by the American Heart Association, consumed through the sauce alone before a single side dish or drink is considered. The problem becomes even more visible when Sweet Baby Ray's reaches a hot grill. With 5 sources of sweetness in the formula, the sauce begins caramelizing rapidly. Within minutes, the outside can become dark, while the meat underneath still requires much more time to cook. From across the yard, that dark surface may look like authentic barbecue bark. Up close, however, the texture and flavor reveal something very different. It tastes less like smoke, seasoning, and hours of controlled cooking, and more like burnt candy covering the meat. Across thousands of customer reviews, one description appears repeatedly. Sweet, not smoky, not tangy, not layered or complex, simply sweet. The first bite may feel rich and satisfying because sugar creates an immediate impact. But, as the meal continues, that intensity becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. The sauce overwhelms the natural flavor already in your refrigerator. You can still use it more effectively by changing when it touches the food. Do not coat the meat with this sauce at the beginning of cooking. Keep it away from direct grill heat until the final 10 to 15 minutes. Brush on a light layer near the end and treat it as a finishing glaze rather than the foundation of the entire cook. It performs best on chicken thighs or wings, where the fat and savory flavor of the meat can push back against the sweetness. On brisket, the sauce can easily bury the smoke, seasoning, and beef flavor that required hours to develop. Sweet Baby Ray's now controls more than 40% of the American barbecue sauce market. It reportedly outsells the next 7 competitors combined. That dominance was built upon a real Chicago basement story from 1985. But much of the loyalty surrounding the modern bottle comes from customers remembering what the brand represented before it was sold. When loyalty becomes that powerful, a company can gradually change the product while allowing the logo to carry the memory forward. Many shoppers continue reaching for the same bottle because the name feels familiar, even if they have not examined the ingredient panel in years. The slogan on the bottle declares that the sauce is the boss. But Dave Raymond left the company more than 20 years ago. The real Sweet Baby Ray is now serving barbecue at his own restaurant outside Chicago, while a Massachusetts salad dressing company controls the sauce that carries his nickname across America. A real family recipe created the reputation. Corporate ownership inherited the loyalty. 5 sources of sweetness now define the formula. If Sweet Baby Ray's is currently in your refrigerator, tell us in the comments how you normally use it. Do you brush it onto the meat throughout the cooking process, or do you add it only near the end? Your answer may reveal why some people experience a dark, bitter coating while others still enjoy it as a finishing glaze. We have now examined all 7 bottles on the avoid list, but the goal of this golden menu investigation is not simply to tell you what to leave on the shelf. The same supermarkets also carry barbecue sauces made by companies that faced similar costs and competitive pressure, yet chose a different direction. Their ingredient panels do not divide corn syrup into several entries. They do not depend on caramel coloring to create the appearance of slow cooking. And they do not use a factory in Ohio to sell the illusion of Tennessee heritage. For these products, the story on the front and the ingredients on the back describe the same sauce. We begin the 5 better choices with an option designed for people who want barbecue flavor without a large amount of added sugar. Best option number 5. G. Hughes Sugar-Free Original Barbecue Sauce. G. Hughes began with a problem that the largest barbecue sauce companies had spent years ignoring. The man behind the brand was a caterer from Braceville, Ohio. Through his work, he regularly served people who were managing blood sugar, following restricted diets, or simply trying to reduce the amount of added sugar in their meals. Those customers faced a frustrating choice. They could avoid bottled barbecue sauce entirely, or they could use products that consumed a large part of their daily sugar allowance before the meal was even finished. Instead of accepting that limitation, G. Hughes created a different formula. He partnered with a family-owned company in northeastern Ohio and developed a barbecue sauce with no added sugar. By 2021, the brand was reportedly generating approximately $50 million. Major corporations had filled their sauces with corn syrup, while assuming that sweetness was essential to success. Then a caterer from a small Ohio town entered the same market with a product those companies had never seriously attempted to build. Customers responded. The ingredient list includes vine-ripened tomatoes, apple cider vinegar, and hickory smoke. The hickory smoke appears as a meaningful part of the recipe, rather than a faint detail hidden near the bottom of the panel. Instead of corn syrup, the sauce uses sucralose to provide sweetness. The result contains no added sugar and no net carbohydrates. The obvious question is whether sucralose is safe. The United States Food and Drug Administration approved sucralose for general use as a sweetener in 1999. It does not affect blood glucose in the same way that conventional sugar does. For people monitoring their sugar intake, that difference can make G. Hughes considerably easier to fit into a carefully managed diet. Individual responses and dietary needs can still vary. But compared with sauces containing several forms of concentrated sugar, the nutritional difference is substantial. Many first-time buyers expect a strong chemical aftertaste. Instead, they describe tasting smoke first, vinegar underneath, and a surprisingly clean finish. One comment appears repeatedly across reviews from people managing diabetes, following a ketogenic diet, or returning to barbecue sauce after avoiding it for years. They forgot it was sugar-free. That response explains much of the success behind the brand. Customers do not feel as though they are accepting a disappointing substitute simply to reduce sugar. They are getting a sauce that can stand beside conventional products without constantly reminding them that it belongs to a restricted category. The lack of sugar also provides a practical advantage on the grill. Because the formula does not depend on corn syrup, molasses, or several other concentrated sweeteners, it is far less likely to scorch immediately under heat. You can brush it onto meat earlier and continue working with it throughout the cooking process. Instead of waiting until the final minutes, you can build several light layers and allow the sauce to develop gradually. G. Hughes Sugar-Free Original Barbecue Sauce is widely available at Walmart, Kroger, Target, and Costco. It generally sells for approximately $4 to $5, placing it close to many conventional national brands. If controlling sugar is important in your household, comment with the word sugar-free below. That will also let Golden Menu know whether you would like a separate investigation into other low-sugar condiments sold in American grocery stores. However, sucralose will not be the right choice for everyone. Some shoppers prefer to avoid artificial sweeteners entirely and want a sauce made from recognizable foods, even if those ingredients contain natural sugar. For those customers, the next bottle begins the clean ingredient tier. Best option number 4. Primal Kitchen Classic Barbecue Sauce. Turn the bottle around and read the ingredient panel aloud. Balsamic vinegar, apple cider vinegar, organic mustard seed, chipotle powder, date paste, fig solids. Every entry sounds like something that could reasonably appear in a home kitchen. There are no mysterious correction ingredients added merely to imitate the color, thickness, or flavor of genuine cooking. After examining 7 sauces built around corn syrup, modified starch, caramel coloring, and artificial smoke, that simple ingredient list clears a standard that should never have become unusual. Open the bottle, and balsamic vinegar arrives immediately. The flavor is sharp, present, and recognizably food-based. It feels closer to something prepared in a kitchen than a liquid engineered in a factory to smell smoky after provide sweetness, but they behave differently from the large amounts of corn syrup found in many bottles from the avoid list. They also contribute flavor and a small amount of naturally occurring fiber rather than supplying sweetness alone. On the grill, those ingredients caramelize more gradually and evenly. The sauce has time to develop with the meat instead of creating an instant candy shell across the surface. The result is a more authentic layer of bark. The exterior darkens progressively, allowing the flavor underneath to continue developing without immediately turning bitter. Many customers initially approach Primal Kitchen expecting a compromise. They assume that a sauce marketed around organic ingredients and dietary certifications will be healthier but less satisfying. Instead, some discover that it performs better on the grill than the conventional sauce they had used for 20 years. The certifications behind the bottle also carry meaning. Primal Kitchen Classic Barbecue Sauce is certified organic by the United States Department of Agriculture. It is approved for the Whole30 program and verified as a product made without genetically modified ingredients. But there is one corporate detail you should understand before placing the bottle in your cart. Kraft Heinz acquired Primal Kitchen in 2019 for approximately $200 million. Yes, this is the same Kraft Heinz connected to 3 products on the avoid list. It is the same company that recorded an impairment charge of approximately $15.4 billion. It is also the company behind the broken promise involving high fructose corn syrup and the formulas used in Heinz and Bull SI barbecue sauces. For now, the Primal Kitchen recipe has remained intact. The reason may be less about corporate generosity and more about simple financial logic. If Kraft Heinz adds corn syrup or substantially weakens the formula, the product could lose its Whole30 approval. Its organic certification could also be threatened. Without those distinctions, the company would struggle to justify the premium price that makes Primal Kitchen financially attractive. So far, that calculation has protected the recipe. Primal Kitchen Classic Barbecue Sauce is commonly available at Whole Foods Market, Target, and Sprouts. It generally costs between $6 and $7. When you hold this bottle, remember both sides of the story. The current ingredient panel is one of the cleanest in the category. The parent company, however, appears repeatedly on the avoid list. The formula deserves recognition, but the label should still be watched closely. If corn syrup ever appears on that panel, customers will know where the pressure probably originated. The next recommended sauce also entered corporate ownership. But when a major spice company acquired the brand, it made one unusually disciplined decision. It left a successful recipe alone. That brings us to best option number 3. Stubb's Original Barbecue Sauce. Long before Stubb's became a national supermarket brand, it was connected to a real restaurant, a real cook, and a real community in Texas. Christopher B. Stubblefield opened his restaurant in Lubbock, Texas, in 1968. People knew him simply as Stubb. He welcomed anyone who walked through the door, served generous plates of barbecue, and charged customers what they could afford to pay. Sunday nights at the restaurant became especially memorable. Musicians including B.B. King, Willie Nelson, and Stevie Ray Vaughan were among the famous names connected to the place. They did not come because a marketing agency had manufactured a fashionable atmosphere. They came because the restaurant had become a genuine gathering place built around food, music, and the personality of barbecue sauce in simple containers. First came mason jars. Then he reused old whiskey bottles. By 1992, the sauce had reached grocery store shelves. He died in May of 1995 and never lived to see the national brand that developed from his work. In 2015, McCormick & Company purchased Stubb's for approximately $100 million. By that point, the original pitmaster had already been gone for 20 years. Corporate acquisitions often lead to cheaper ingredients, simplified recipes, or gradual changes that loyal customers are never clearly told about. But McCormick made a disciplined decision with Stubbs. The company largely left the successful formula alone. Read the current ingredient panel. Tomato puree comes first, followed by cane sugar, distilled vinegar, molasses, salt, and spices. There is no high fructose corn syrup. There is no modified food starch creating artificial thickness. There is no caramel coloring attempting to imitate the appearance of a sauce cooked slowly over time. Open the bottle, and the difference from the products on the avoid list is immediate. Tomato and vinegar establish the foundation. Molasses adds a restrained sweetness underneath. Black pepper and chipotle contribute real heat instead of disappearing beneath a heavy layer of sugar. Stubbs is also thinner than many mass-market barbecue sauces. Some shoppers may initially mistake that texture for weakness, but the difference comes from what the formula does not contain. The sauce is not padded with modified starch, simply to create the appearance of richness. Its natural consistency is more transparent, because the manufacturer is not using a thickening agent to simulate body. In this case, thinness is a sign of honesty. On the grill, cane sugar and molasses caramelize progressively rather than burning into an immediate shell. The sauce can develop alongside the meat, helping build real bark without sealing the surface beneath hardened syrup. Customer reviews repeatedly return to three descriptions: peppery, tangy, honest. Because the formula does not scorch as quickly as many highly sweetened sauces, you can apply it during different stages of cooking instead of treating it only as a finishing glaze. It works especially well with pork and chicken, where the vinegar, pepper, tomato, and restrained sweetness can support the meat without dominating it. Stubbs' original barbecue sauce is available at Walmart and most major American grocery chains. It generally costs between $3 and $4. That makes Stubbs one of the easiest upgrades in this entire investigation. You do not need to visit a specialty food store or pay a dramatic premium. It is probably already available in the same location where you currently buy Sweet Baby Ray's, Kraft, Heinz, or Open Pit. If you want the most practical recommendation from Golden Menu, remember the name Stubbs. It provides a recognizable ingredient list, balanced flavor, wide availability, and a price close to the products on the avoid list. But the next company did not inherit a famous national brand or purchase decades of customer loyalty. It built its reputation through competition and proved the same family recipe on two separate occasions almost a decade apart. Best option number 2. Lily's Q Carolina Barbecue Sauce. This sauce entered one of the most competitive barbecue contests in North America and won. Then, 9 years later, the same family recipe returned to that competition and won again. Despite those achievements, many American shoppers have never heard of it. Memphis in May is not a small neighborhood cooking contest. It attracts serious barbecue teams that spend years refining their techniques. Chef Charlie McKenna and his father entered the competition against approximately 200 rivals. Their recipe won first place in the pork shoulder category. That victory alone would have been enough to establish credibility. But the family returned 9 years later. In 2016, approximately 235 teams participated, representing 22 American states and 5 foreign countries. McKenna brought back the same recipe his grandmother had taught him while he was growing up in South Carolina. The result was another first-place finish. Large national brands can spend millions of dollars purchasing advertisements, endorsements, premium shelf space, and carefully designed packaging. What they cannot purchase is a genuine first-place result against hundreds of experienced competitors. Charlie McKenna earned that result twice. This is not merely a sentimental story about a grandmother and a family recipe. It is measurable evidence. The sauce faced experienced judges in a highly competitive environment and proved itself on 2 different occasions. McKenna named the Chicago-based company after his grandmother Lily. The ingredient panel is notable not only for what it contains, but also for what it leaves out. There is no high fructose corn syrup. There is no modified food starch. There is no caramel coloring, and there are no synthetic preservatives attempting to extend the life of a weakened formula. Apple cider vinegar and distilled vinegar are not minor background notes. They form the structural foundation of the sauce. That foundation changes the way Lily's Q behaves on the grill. The lighter texture allows the sauce to penetrate the surface of the meat, rather than creating a thick shell on top. The vinegar works into the developing crust and helps balance rich fat, instead of covering everything beneath sweetness. This is a Carolina-style sauce, so acidity plays a central role. Pulled pork is its most natural partner because the vinegar cuts through the richness of the meat and keeps every bite from feeling heavy. It also performs well on ribs and smoked chicken. A small amount drizzled over coleslaw can connect the flavors across an entire plate in a way that the excessively sweet bottles on the avoid list cannot achieve. People who try Lily's Q often describe a moment of recognition. They discover a smoky and acidic character they did not realize had been missing from bottled barbecue sauce. The sauce works beside the meat instead of sitting over it and demanding all the attention. In February of 2025, The Takeout ranked Lily's Q as the best store-bought barbecue sauce in the country. If two major competition victories and a national ranking have not already placed this bottle in your shopping cart, there is a simple explanation. The companies controlling the largest share of the barbecue sauce market also control enormous advertising budgets. A family operation from Chicago cannot compete with that level of visibility. What it has instead is a proven recipe and a competition record. Charlie McKenna continues to own the company. Lily's Q Carolina barbecue sauce is available at Whole Foods Market, the Fresh Market, and through online retailers. It generally costs between $8 and $9. 2 championships. 1 family recipe. 1 company that still remains connected to the person who built it. If you have tried a Carolina-style sauce before, tell us in the comments whether you prefer its sharp vinegar flavor or the thicker sweetness of a Kansas City-style sauce. Your answer may help another Golden Menu viewer choose the style that best matches the food they enjoy cooking. Only one bottle did not win its position through celebrity branding or a massive advertising campaign. It earned the top spot because the same family has owned it for more than 3 decades. The recipe remains immediately recognizable, and customers repeatedly describe it as one of the few bottled sauces they never need to repair at home. That brings us to the best option in this Golden Menu investigation. Best option number 1. Bone-sucking sauce original. Most of the brands examined in this investigation eventually became part of enormous corporations. Once that happened, the people protecting the original recipes were replaced by acquisition teams, financial targets, and constant pressure to improve profit margins. Bone-sucking sauce followed a very different path. The story began in Raleigh, North Carolina, with a real estate appraiser named Phil Ford. He wanted to recreate the Western Carolina barbecue sauce his mother had made for the family. Working from memory, he rebuilt the recipe and eventually launched bone-sucking sauce in 1992. More than 3 decades later, Phil Ford and his family still own the company. The recipe has not been handed to an international conglomerate, and the brand has never been separated from the people who created it. Read the ingredient panel. Tomato paste, apple cider vinegar, honey, molasses, organic yellow mustard, salt, dried onion, horseradish, paprika, dried garlic. Every ingredient is immediately recognizable. There are no mysterious chemical names and no collection of corrective additives, compensating for weaknesses elsewhere in the formula. The bottle may have one of the least dignified names in the barbecue sauce aisle, but it carries one of the clearest ingredient panels in the entire category. On the grill, the honey and molasses caramelize gradually and evenly. They do not immediately form a scorched ceiling over meat that remains undercooked inside. The sauce develops with the food instead of racing ahead of it. Tomato paste provides body, apple cider vinegar supplies acidity, and mustard creates structure. The horseradish arrives as a gentle warmth rather than an aggressive sharpness. Nothing about the flavor suggests that the formula was designed during a corporate cost reduction meeting. It tastes like a family recipe, because that is exactly what it is. The most revealing customer reviews are not always about the first bite, They often describe something people notice only after using the sauce through several cookouts. The meat simply comes out better, and the cook gradually stops thinking about the sauce. That may sound like a strange compliment, but it is one of the strongest a barbecue sauce can receive. A good sauce should support the food rather than demanding constant attention. Several buyers describe bone-sucking sauce as the first bottled product they never felt compelled to modify. They did not need to add vinegar for acidity, mustard for balance, or pepper for heat. The sauce arrived finished. Now place bone-sucking sauce beside Sweet Baby Ray's and compare the stories behind the bottles. Sweet Baby Ray's began in a Chicago basement in 1985. The Raymond brothers developed the recipe, entered a major barbecue competition against approximately 700 rivals, and finished in second place. Then, in 2005, the brand was sold to a Massachusetts salad dressing company for approximately $30 million. The original creator no longer controls the product. High fructose corn syrup is now the first ingredient. Corn syrup appears again under a separate entry, and the complete formula contains 5 different sources of sweetness. Despite that ingredient panel, Sweet Baby Ray's controls more than 40% of the American barbecue sauce market. Its logo continues carrying the emotional memory of a family brand that has not existed in its original form for more than with a mother's recipe in Raleigh in 1992. The Ford family still owns the company. Honey and molasses provide the sweetness, while apple cider vinegar, mustard, horseradish, paprika, onion, and garlic create the balance. The recipe has remained under the control of the same family for more than 30 years. These 2 bottles may be sitting on the same supermarket shelf right now. One gives you 5 sources of sweetness and a logo connected to a story from the past. The other gives you a family recipe that has never been handed to a corporate acquisition team. Bone-sucking sauce may cost slightly more per serving, but that difference pays for a recipe that was never systematically negotiated downward. You can find it at Whole Foods Market, Harris Teeter, Publix, and directly through Ford's Gourmet Foods online. It generally costs between $7 and $8. You may call that a premium price, but it is also the price of keeping recognizable ingredients, family ownership, and a completed recipe inside the same bottle. Every brand on the avoid list made a similar calculation. The companies assumed shoppers would reach for a familiar logo, notice a hint of smoke when opening the bottle, and never take the time to read the ingredient panel. But the evidence behind these products is publicly available. The current ingredient panels can be examined by anyone. The Kraft Heinz impairment charge appears in official filings submitted to the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. The earnings call transcripts are public. The Kraft announcement promising to remove high fructose corn syrup can still be found online. Current retail listings show that high fructose corn syrup has returned as the first ingredient. Both pieces of information can be opened and compared in the same browser. Clorox owned KC Masterpiece for approximately 30 years. Ken's Foods, a Massachusetts salad dressing company, now owns Sweet Baby Ray's. Jack Daniel's barbecue sauce uses the reputation of Tennessee whiskey while the product itself is manufactured in Ohio. Kraft announced an improvement, quietly reversed it, and left the evidence of both decisions online. Several years later, the company recorded an impairment charge of approximately $15.4 billion. Its own financial documents confirmed what many shoppers had already started noticing through taste and ingredient labels. Familiar brands were no longer carrying the value consumers once believed they had. So what should you buy during your next grocery trip? If you want the easiest and most affordable upgrade, choose Stubb's Original Barbecue Sauce. It is available at Walmart and most major American supermarket chains for approximately $3 to $4. You do not need to visit a specialty store. You do not need to dramatically increase your grocery budget. Stubb's provides tomato, vinegar, molasses, pepper, and spice without high fructose corn syrup, modified starch, or caramel coloring. If blood sugar is an important consideration for you or someone in your household, Look for G. Hughes Sugar-Free Original Barbecue Sauce. It is available at many Walmart, Kroger, Target, and Costco locations. The formula contains sucralose, so it may not suit every personal preference. But it provides an option with no added sugar and does not behave like a syrup-based sauce on the grill. If you want recognizable organic ingredients and do not mind paying more, Primal Kitchen is a strong choice. Just remember that Kraft Heinz now owns the company, so continue checking the ingredient panel in case the formula changes in the future. For a competition-proven Carolina sauce, Lily's Q deserves to be found. The same family recipe earned first place in a major barbecue contest twice. Matters most. Choose bone-sucking sauce. More than 30 years after its creation, the same family remains connected to every bottle. If you remember only one name from this video, make it Stubbs. It costs approximately $4, appears in most major grocery chains, and offers the easiest immediate improvement over the heavily sweetened products on the avoid list. Now we want to hear from you. Which barbecue sauce was in your refrigerator before you watched this golden menu investigation? Was it Sweet Baby Ray's, Kraft Heinz, Bull, SI, Open Pit, or another brand we did not mention? Write the name in the comments. Your answer may help us decide which barbecue sauce brands should be investigated in a future video. If you know someone who currently has a bottle of Sweet Baby Ray's in the refrigerator, share this video with them. They may still enjoy the sauce, but they deserve to understand what is inside and how the brand changed after its original creators left. Press the like button if this investigation helped you, subscribe to Golden Menu, and turn on notifications so you do not miss our next examination of the familiar products hiding unexpected stories inside American grocery stores. The label was designed to protect the brand. Now you know how to read beyond it. Thank you for watching Golden Menu. We will see you in the next investigation.